So, Tom, we have a person recently retiring from NASA who has been thinking about the nature of existence for a very long time and has brought to your attention an essay that he's written. And maybe you'd like to comment on it. He's calling the essay The Hardest Problem of Consciousness. We often hear of the hard problem of consciousness. Why is there qualia or experience of anything in the first place? I would submit there is an even harder and more important question. Why do I seem to be a specific individual experiencing a specific subset of qualia? If material reductionism is to be relevant to the big questions, then it must explain not how brains generate consciousness, but how the specific brain in my head could create the specific consciousness I seem to be looking out of the eyeballs of this specific body. Why do I personally exist as an individual in the first place? Out of the infinite matter in the universe, how is that only the 3 pounds in my head could create me? What is different about that 3 pounds for this to occur? Consider that billions of bodies showed up before this one. Billions showed up after this one. None of them seem to have created my existence. This body could be running around without it being me, just like these billions of others. All bodies are made of the same elements. All brains have the same anatomy. If all brains are basically the same and are creating consciousness, then there should only be one consciousness looking out of every set of eyeballs simultaneously. A hopelessly superimposed existence from every possible viewpoint at once. I'm sure that materialists would claim that no brains are so complex that they are all different. All right, so what would have to be recreated in another brain for me to exist looking out of another set of eyeballs? When the ontologies purporting to explain consciousness are examined critically, it becomes obvious that all materialist reductionist strategies fall completely in attempting to address the individuality question. Would you like to comment on it?
I will. And, he said a whole bunch of things that are all true. Materialism does fail. It does not explain consciousness or how consciousness can be individual, how consciousness is formed, where consciousness comes from. They failed at all those things. When it comes to consciousness, you're trying to take a material science and a science that only works in the objective realm, and then you're trying to apply it to the subjective realm, consciousness, awareness, and it doesn't work. Remember in my book when I did the play off the Three Stooges, and they were looking for a non-physical microscope, so that they could look at the non-physical things. But when they just looked through a physical microscope, they couldn't see anything other than physical things. So that was their quandary, and this kind of falls in that same category of the Three Stooges joke that I had in my book. But in any case, yes, all that's true. The materialist paradigm even fails to explain its own scientific experiments, much less consciousness. They cannot explain the double slit experiment or why it works that way. So materialism is obviously failed, and it has a very destructive ethic that goes with it, and that's control, power, and force. The ethic of materialism has been a very destructive set of attitudes for humanity to take on. So it's failed there too, in the sense that it's created something ugly as far as people's attitudes. Their ethical and moral base is kind of polluted by the concepts of materialism. So anyway, yes, I kind of put a check next to all those things where he says that materialism fails. It certainly does. Now, as far as individuality, what the materialist would tell him is that they would say that the brain is what creates consciousness. That's a materialist viewpoint. So with that viewpoint, given that the brain is created, it's a physical brain, and that is the source of consciousness. That's their assumption. So give them that assumption, and then they will tell you that that brain has potential, but it grows up into an individual because of all the experiences that it has and because of the biology, all the chromosomes and all of the, instincts and all of the, thinking of the right word, genetics that it has. So you have the genetics, and then you have the environmental influence. And because the genetics in everybody are a little different, we all don't look exactly alike. All 9 billion of us are not identical twins. Our genetics are different, and our environments are all different. So because the genetics and environment are all different for everybody, then we have individual people who have their own perspective from those genetics and from those experiences. So that's how they would explain individuals. But it's based on this assumption that consciousness is a creation of the brain, you see. And that does not explain qualia or anything else. It fails, that assumption fails by itself. So that materialistic explanation is based on an initial condition or an assumption that is wrong. So that's why they get to the point that they cannot explain qualia or consciousness. And microtubules have only been suggested because they work at the quantum level, and quantum physics we know is non-local. And we know consciousness is non-local. Therefore, consciousness must be some sort of quantum effect. And that, of course, is wrong.
Now,
Consciousness is not a quantum effect.
Microtubules is a theory of Dr. Stuart
Yeah.
Hamerhoff.
Yes, indeed. But that's why they come up with that theory. Somehow consciousness has to be related to quantum events because they both can do non-local things. Nothing else can. Therefore, consciousness must be some quantum effect. And, of course, that's not true. It's not a quantum effect at all. It's not physical. You can't make something non-physical out of physical parts. It just doesn't work that way. So he's right. It's the failure of materialism to actually explain the world that they see is everywhere. They can only approximately explain just the objective world. And even then they have problems, like I say, like a double slit experiment. That's an objective world experiment. It's unexplainable with an assumption of materialism. So it it fails kind of all the way around, and it comes with a very dysfunctional ethic. So I think it's time we let materialism go. And I think this gentleman who wrote that essay had come to that conclusion as well. It's time to let that go. It just doesn't work. And it not only doesn't work, but it creates a lot of dysfunction with the ethic that goes along with materialism. So
Right.
Yes, it's time we move on past that. But the next big paradigm shift that takes us away from materialism is such a big shift that it's just taking a long time to catch on. But I think we're at that point that it's starting to catch on now. So maybe within the next decade, we'll see a big change in attitudes and understandings. We'll see a more complete and better physics supplant the physics we have now. And we'll see an understanding, and actually, should we say, a logical understanding of the subjective reality that we live in, which is good because the subjective reality is actually more important than the objective reality. The subjective reality is more significant to us. It's relationship, it's justice, it's truth, it's value. All of those things are subjective. This has value, this doesn't have value. That's subjective. So all of the things that orbit around value, which is everything that's important to us, like relationships, they all fall over on the subjective side. So we have that part of our reality that is most important. And our science says, we don't go there. We can't say anything about it. We only talk about the objective side. Well, that's nice. We need to be able to understand the objective side, but I think it's more important that we understand the subjective side because that's where we tend to live most of our life.
I think people are looking for a solution, and perhaps the harsher environment that we're in now is the impetus for seeking something with a little more, with the softer side of intuition and subjectivity and things that really matter to us. Well, another retired NASA physicist named Thomas, thank you very much for your essay, and thank you, Tom, for commenting on it. You have more power than you think. Hi, this is Donna from MBT Events. I have had the privilege to work with Tom Campbell for nearly 20 years now, and I can tell you from the feedback received through all those years that he has improved and changed thousands of lives with his My Big Toe theory. As a physicist and explorer of the larger reality, Tom has developed a program where you can learn to access and develop your natural ability as consciousness. His expertly crafted binaural beats are included. Details are in the description below. Thank you.
I and MBT Events hope you like this video. If you do, then you should consider being a Patreon member, because Patreon members get early access to our special content. You will also be able to get your questions answered by me in special Q&A sessions, and most importantly, your contribution as a patron member will enable us to produce the content that you're looking for. So thank you.